It was lovely last summer, and I was sitting in the garden a lot, and I just thought what a bland look my garage had. So I thought, like I say, I'm proud of being in the potteries and the pottery industry's going. So I thought, what I'll do, I'll paint one on the side of me, I'll paint a mural on the side of my garage. So consequently I did this. The tall bottle ovens had got go in the middle between the two windows. And then these are just, them are houses, and this is a factory. Harrison's is a bit like this with a doorway in. Everybody likes it, everybody seems to like it. Anyway, I have loads of visitors and they come in, they say, oh, I like your drawing. I suppose it'll stay there till I get fed up of it, and then I'll try something else. Next time you come, there might be a big pirate ship or something on it.
You get the clay and you put it through a pug, and you make it into a round circle, right? As it goes through, it automatically makes it round. From there, you cut it off into batches straight to the makers department. The flatware maker makes the plates. Now that's a massive department. The labourer takes the plates down to the kiln. At the moment, when it's clay and it's put onto the kiln, it turns from clay into biscuit. It's a tunnel kiln. As it goes through, after it's placed, as it goes through, it becomes, it's 1800 degrees, dries through, and it becomes solid. If you were to drop a clay plate, it would just crack and you could recycle it. But if you were to drop a biscuit plate, it's bust and there's nothing you can do with that basically. After it becomes biscuit, it goes to the biscuit warehouse. It gets selected, it goes through this vibro machine. So if there's any bits on it, it gets rid of it. It goes through a vibro machine, comes out the other side, and it all gets selected. The biscuitware all gets selected. From there, it goes to the printing shop. The printing shop and the back stamper, same thing basically. It gets back stamped, then it gets printed. Then it goes to the dipping house. From the dipping house, it goes down to the cranking department. What will happen is it gets cranked, it goes through the gloss kiln, it will go straight through to the gloss warehouse, it will get sorted or grinded, selected. After it's been selected, this plate that we're on about, after it's been selected, it's going to go to get packed. After it's been packed, it's going to go shipped off to a country or even here to a shop, wherever it's been ordered to. Then it's going to go to your house, it's going to go on your dinner table where you're going to have your roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. So it's gone through all that process to make one plate.
Put me in the bottle oven sometimes when they haven't got an oven. Whatever job I was doing, I had to get in front with it and go and help the fireman fire the oven. Hot. I can say very hot, extremely hot. You had to get 40 wheelbarrows full of coal into 10 fire holes in a matter of about a quarter of an hour, because there was the smoke control order, not a smokeless order, a smoke controlled order, where you couldn't have a chimney smoking for more than 20 minutes in any hour. So you've got to get as much coal into the fire as possible so that you've got time to smoke it off before your 20 minutes was off. some chaps used to sit at the top of Pickering Fields in a car with a stopwatch and a book, carefully watching all the chimneys in the valley. And if he went a couple of minutes over, he was down. "You've had your chimney smoking again, there you are." Apparently, it's been going on from about 1935. There was a smoke control order on Stoke-on-Trent from about the 1930s, I do believe. The smoke bobby used to come down and knock at the door for the oven man or the boiler man, because it had the boiler, the boiler chimney smoking or something like that. It was a regular call. I thought it was a statutory fine or something, I don't know. But he used to come and tell you and give you a slip of paper saying he'd had the chimney smoking. The only chimneys they could smoke was the pit. He could belch smoke out 24 hours a day. The attitude being, this man down the pit and he'd get it out any time. So they could smoke any time they wanted. They'd usually got about 20 or 30 boilers in a row underneath the chimney, of course, at the pit. It's not the same as a pot bank.
They used to make tiles, press tiles, and they had a great big tile press room with about 30 women in, with what's called fly presses in them. And what they did with these fly presses, they had a mould, a die for the tile, metal die for the tile. They used to scrape very fine powder into the die, into the bottom half of the die. Then they used to swing on a big lever which was on a thread, and as they swung it round, the top die dropped down and pressed onto the bottom die and made the tile. Then they used to swing the lever back again and put the foot on a device that lifted the finished pressed powdered tile up out of the bottom die. Then they used to put that on a piece of wood at the side and then make another one, and they used to carry on like that all day long. Someone used to come along and pick it up and take it into a drying room. Then they used to stay in this drying room till they were dry, and then the tiles used to go come out of the drying room, and somebody used to fettle the edges off and the sharp edges and any bits and pieces and inspect them to see if they weren't cracked or damaged. Once they were dried, they went into the kiln and were fired to what's called biscuit. When they were after the biscuit, they were then put into a machine that used to drop them onto a conveyor belt one at a time, and it used to shoot along on this conveyor belt and go under like a curtain of glaze, and it used to cover the tile with glaze on the top, and then someone used to take it off at the other end and carefully put it on a stand until the glaze was dry, and then it was fired again and the glaze used to harden on it that way. If they wanted to put sometimes the women had a sponge, and say they went through on a blue glaze, the women used to dip a sponge in like a darker blue glaze and just touch the top of the tile a few times to make a pattern on the tile, and then it used to be fired, and that's how they made all the different patterns on the tile. Sometimes they had like specific patterns on the tile that they went through one lot of glaze, and then once that was dry they went on through another set of glaze, so this specific pattern was put on the tile, and then it was fired again, and then it went out for packing and it was finished.
And then payday came, and I thought, great, £2, 7 and 6. great. 44 hours a week we worked Saturday mornings as well for £2.7 and 6. So we stood there, everybody had the wages, always in a little wage packet, not us four. So we said, where's ours? Oh, well, you have to stand on the benches and you have to sing first before you get your money. You have to stand there and sing. I can't even remember what we sung, but we had to stand and sing and everybody's laughing at you, you know, then to give us the money. But it was different. I mean, nothing like it is today, nothing at all. You worked hard, you expected to work hard, but there was something, everybody was singing, you know. You'd start at the top of the shop and they'd shout, right, Mark, it's your turn, what we're starting off with, you know, and it'd be something out of Carousel or real good community spirit. Everybody was, you know, happy. Yeah, can't say any more than that, they were happy.
Yes, I used to go to dinner. I used to go into the New Hall Pottery. While I was still at school, she worked on the New Hall Pottery. And I used to go there for my dinner. She'd get me a dinner from the canteen. And I would go and sit in what they called a little stove, place where they put the moulds for the cups to dry. And as you ate your dinner, you could see on your plate, it says, this plate has been stolen from the New Hall Pottery. Started stealing the plates.
They had the pot banks in the area, and they were all around that part of Hanley, and even Tunstall and Milton. They had a place in Milton because they used the canal to transport the ware. The canal ran right through the pottery buildings, and they used that as a means of transport to their other pot banks. So it was quite, at that time, a very industrious environment, and I felt quite good at landing a job there. So I think we had Hanley Bank, Eastwood and Imperial all close together, all performing their own independent function. So getting to know all of that was interesting. It was just like a rabbit warren. Every pot bank I would go into the Imperial one, which was another set of buildings, and you'd have to know where all the various processes were. And then there was the Hanley Bank opposite, and again there would be other parts of the processes, all completely different. Different buildings and different stairs, and then they each had their own packing houses with straw everywhere and rats running around and so on. And I can remember the offices as well, how dated they were, because the design of the offices with all the wooden panelling and the glass windows where the director had his office and where his PA sat, it was a throwback to the 1930s and the 1940s. The office area hadn't been modernised at all. And so I entered this sort of old type of family business that was one of the major pottery manufacturers in the area. And it was very daunting because there were so many people working there. And I remember how strict the processes were and how managers would expect certain things of the staff. And I must say that when I started in the office as well, it was just as strict in the office as it was on the factory floor. And if you needed to replace your pen, if your pen ran out, you went to the director and saw his PA, and she'd open the safe and get these pens out for you to choose a pen. They didn't even issue a supply of pens in certain offices, you know. It was control really was the main ethos of the whole process.
Started off as a lithography, and it was traditional lithography, and a lot harder than the slide. I don't know whether it was any better because it was quite dirty. You started off with, we'll say you've got your plates, say you're doing 8-inch plates, and you put a sticky stuff called size on these plates. So you had a paintbrush and you had to cover completely the plate with this size. Then you put them on a shelf, stood them up on a shelf, and then you waited till they were not bone dry, just tacky, just enough. Then you put the transfer onto that and smoothed it all down, made sure there was no creases in, went all around your plate, whatever design you got. Then you had a little hard sponge and you rubbed hard at it. No, you wet it first, so you got a soft sponge and you wet it all first, and then you rubbed it hard. Then you had a soft sponge with a little bit of soap, and you fetched all this paper off. It's like the transfers you put on your hands now, and you fetched it all off. Hopefully all the pattern was there, but sometimes it wasn't, and bits would go astray. Then you had to have a little pen knife and get all these tiny bits off. And then they went to be fired, and then half the time bits would be missing. Then that's when the colour mender came in. Then the colour mender came in and filled in what was missing off the, you know, what the transfer hadn't left behind. So it was hard. It was really hard work. That was before the slide lithographing come in, which is, I think, dead easy. You know.
The canal was probably busier than it is now with goods. I mean, every pot bank was offloading goods, prices, Dun & Bennett's, Bailey's Potteries, Newport Pottery, the Millet Metal Port, the Millet Long Port. They was always offloading or loading something. There was the dockyard, Anderton dockyard where they built and repaired the boats. There was the Merseyweaver dockyard on what was the Baselon branch. They used to man the Merseyweaver Carrying Company used to man their boats there on a sloping ramp. And the Co-op Bakery, all their flour came in barges, taking up hoist up the side of the building. At the end of the Baselon branch there was a big basin where there were lots and lots of Anderton sheds full of clay, and another one full of goods that was kept locked. Foodstuffs used to come by the canal, and wood coming to J. West, who made the crates, the willow rods, what they made the crates with. They used to be about 20-30 foot long, coppice wood. It was busy, yes, there was 2 tankers as well, used to come from Shelton Bar and Etruria Gasworks, carrying tar to the chemical works for distilling. So those 2 barges were everlasting going up and down, smelling of tar. As I say, there was barges, motorboats, lots and lots of horse-drawn boats at that time.
When I first started at Joiners Square, they still had the old stone circular grinding pans, which are now museum pieces at Etruria Mill. But we used to use them up until 1960s, mid-60s. We used to use the grinding pans because they used to grind bone. And bone used to make a lot of air when it was being ground in a cylinder. And we had problems with it blowing the lids off because the cylinder used to pressurise. So we ended up, that's what I was told happened in the olden days. And then, so they always, excuse me, they always used to grind the bone on open pans. The bone for bone china used to be calcined. You know, it was never, you know, raw bone like, it was calcined bone. But it was dead eerie, you know. The lorry used to come and tip it into a yard, and then the blokes used to wheelbarrow it into the grinding pans. But it was really eerie seeing skulls and, you know, animal skulls and animal heads and ribs and legs and, you know, things like that as bones in a yard. You know, it was dead eerie, that was. But that's how that's how they used to be.
I started as a labourer, and of course you'd got to learn to carry on your head and on your shoulder baskets and whatnot, and so we used to sit around the kiln in the morning at 7:30, and the foreman would come and he'd go around all the departments, see if anybody was missing. Then he'd come back and he'd say, right, you're working in the packing house, you're working in the slip house, you were carrying down to the decorators and that kind of thing. And that was how you learned to do it.
There was some beautiful ware. Some absolutely stunning ware that they made. The most stunning one they made, I don't know what it was called, but I know that they made, there was one called Finlandia, there was one called onion rings, or something like that. No, not onion rings, I forgot what it's called now. Onion something or another. Blue onion, that was it. Blue onion. Wow! You've got blue onion, you've got Finlandia, you've got Country Life. Oh my gosh. It's really taking me back now. There's loads. There's loads. These are the ones that are really hitting home, really. Because we bought from the second shop, you see. Plus we got a lot of discount. Because the way you do it is you get 25% off or 20% off, right? No, sorry, you get 40% off, right? Or something like that. And what used to happen was when there was a sale on, 20% sale, what you used to do is go in and buy. So there was a 20% off sale, your 40% off, that's 60% off. So what I used to do then was I used to tell all my relatives, listen, there's 60% off, come and buy. And I used to buy them cents. You know, well, why not? Do you understand? That's the time to buy, man. I never used to have a penny off anybody. Never.
The American market went for the more traditional shaped cup and plates and patterns. They liked old mill scenes with the water wheel and the blobs of colour that just went on the transfers. Whereas the home market was a bit more upbeat, and even the design of cups were straighter and more angular. It was quite innovative because it sort of reflected the way buildings were going. I mean, in the 60s, there were horrific now, on reflection, designs, but at the time, you know, straight cube type buildings and angular designs were the sort of, they were commonplace. So tableware reflected this sort of cleanness somehow, this sort of non-fussiness. You'd have stripes, you'd have circles and squares, designs that were quite clear, and there was no nonsense about them. You know, sort of very matter-of-fact designs, and that is how it went for quite a number of years.
Well, one of my first jobs was in the packing house, and to carry down to the packers. In other words, they had a great big warehouse full of plates, and of course the war had just started then, so everybody in the army had to have a pint mug, a soup plate and a dinner plate, so new war was fully booked on them kind of thing. So he took me in this big warehouse, like an aeroplane hangar, and he'd carry them down, and it was full, this high, 3-4 foot high of plates, just a pack down the middle. You used to have to carry them down, well, 6, 8, 10 dozen at a time. And it was always a good way to carry. And then they'd pack them in cartons. And then you'd learn to pack them in cartons and so on.
Well, an ungo was really where you get a white plate and you get a strip applied to it, a coloured strip, which you could either have like yellow, green, pink, blue, or whatever on a white strip. So you've got like a red face and a white background back. That's what an ungo is. Well, the plate is put on, and then these go around and it sprays the coloured strip onto the face of the plate. The machine, I got like cogs underneath, and you got a container which was pressurised with air, and this, when it was rotated, they pressed the buttons underneath these cams so that the strip would be released and come through these. They had 2 guns on either side, and it used to have a spider, what they call a spider, with plaster rings on. So the wear was placed on these rings and used to go round in a circle for so many revs, and then they were taken off.
It was paid piecework. But in the pottery industry, a dozen doesn't just mean 12. The only thing I think is a dozen of 12 is 8-inch plates. And then you get like, if you're doing saucers, it was 18 to a dozen. If you're doing egg cups, it was 24 to a dozen. But on the other hand, if you're doing a 12-inch plate, it was 2 or 3 to a dozen. Teapots were 4 to a dozen. It depended on the size and how complicated. Like for put a transfer on a teapot, it's so complicated because you've got to come over the bends of the teapot, where on a plate you just put it on, don't you? So it was all worked out. So no, 12 doesn't mean a dozen trapatis. It means a lot of things. And that's how that was worked out, and that's how your pay was worked out.
There was lads from Liverpool came to school and Manchester and Oxford and you name it. The barges came from everywhere. And while they were stationary, being loaded and unloaded, the kids had to come to school. On the canal barges, oh yes, everybody pulled the weight on the barge. The little ones, if there was a horse, the little ones had to look after the horse and saddle him up and coil the ropes up and what have you as they loosed off and started going. The mooring ropes had to be put away and the towing ropes brought out and hooked to the horse, yeah, or to the barge in front. There was nothing to see the little kiddies being undressed in the house at the back of the boat, and they'd run along a plank to the front where there was another little bedroom on the butty boats, the horse-drawn boats. And they'd be ready for bed at the back and run right along the plank in the night dresses and their pyjamas, as boys and girls. It looked funny to us, but that was home to them. Families probably have two or three boats in one family, and they all wore clogs. So when they came round Spencer Street, they wouldn't go up Portvale Street because of the uneven paving. Terrible, very worn out stones. Square stones, about a foot square, like big 1 foot cubes sort of thing laid down, and they'd worn away. They couldn't walk on them, so they used to come round Spencer Street, clop, 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 clogs. Barge decoration is nothing at all compared to what was, as I remember as a child, because the quality's not there. Someone does it who thinks they can do it, whereas people who did it knew how to do it. And the sign writers and painters were a different breed of people than what they are today. There was some immaculate work done on barges, and you think, why did you bother on a working barge to be so meticulous about a wreath painted on the side of a barge? And you think, and you listen to the bargees, we haven't got a garden, we've got to have flowers somewhere. And that's how they looked at it. Barge painting to them was to make their surroundings as pleasant as possible.
That was by Federation Road. So at top of the banks, like if you went along Federation Road, there was like banks of waste pottery. At top of there was where they made the Whimsies. So not Wade Heath, A.J. Wade. And of course they tipped most of their waste onto there. But they were proper banks of just broken pottery. Say, and as children, we used to go up there and dig real deep and find the Whimsies, you know, little cats and little dogs, and yeah.
How glaze is made and how you make the material fine, make like stones into fine powder. What they do, the ingredients that goes into glaze is it's basically it's a silicon based frit, which is like glass, and the glass is fired in a big kiln, and then it runs out of the big kiln and runs into water, which shatters it into pieces about like slithers of glass, basically, perhaps 1/4 of an inch in diameter, sometimes an inch long or less. But it's lumps of glass. Now they make 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of these frits, which is the base material for glaze. The lead bisilica frit is the base material for lead glazes. Lead bisilica is lead and 2 silicas. One is silica sand and the other is alumina sand. And that's how they make lead bisilica frit. Then all the different ingredients to make whatever colour you want, a white glaze, a coloured glaze, or an enamel, or the enamel is only smaller versions. They put into what's called a ball mill, which is a cylinder of about 6 or 8 foot diameter. In later years they were larger. When we moved up to Mere, they were 12 foot in diameter, but these in Hanley, they were about 6 foot in diameter and about 6 foot long with closed ends, and they were lined with stone. And there was a feed hole in the middle at one end, on the middle at the top, and then right opposite the feed hole there was an air plug hole with an air plug in. And the cylinder was then filled with a depth of about, it was over half, but it wasn't 3/4. I would say 2/3. It was filled with pebbles, for want of a better word, flint stones, flint pebbles of about 3 inches diameter. But of course, being pebbles washed up off the beach, they weren't all round. They were all different shapes, but they were roughly 3 inches in diameter when they started in the cylinder. The ingredients were then put in the cylinder through the feed hole at the top, and then the required amount of water was then put in at the top. Then a lid was put on it and bolted down tightly, and then the cylinder was rotated at a certain speed. It had to be rotated at a certain speed because as the cylinder went round, the pebbles climbed up the side of the cylinder and then rolled down on top of one another to the bottom of the cylinder again. And this motion, the raw materials of the glaze and the water were in between the pebbles as they run down. Consequently, everything was ground up into a very, very, very fine liquid, and they used to run for 18 or 20 hours to get this fineness in the liquid. And every so often they had to open it with the air hole at the top and carefully let out any air that was generated, because they used to pressurise the cylinders out, and the process used to make air, really, I suppose, as well. And they had to let the air out every so often. About every 6 or 7 hours they had to let the air out. But after about 18 hours, it was minimum 18 hours, they used to run it, and then they used to take it to the top, the feed hole to the top, and then the foreman of the mill used to stick his hand in. It used to be warm as well. Stick his hand in, rub it between his fingers, and he'd say, "Oh, it wants another hour," or "It wants a bit longer," or "Yeah, that's done." Nowadays, it has to go to the lab, and samples have to go to the laboratory and everything like that. But that's how it was in them days. Foreman used to stick his hand in, rub it between his finger and his thumb, and he used to say if it wanted coming off or not. And then, if he wanted coming off, they used to replace the bung at the top with a tap, and then turn the cylinder down to the bottom, and then run it off and sieve it, make sure there's no lumps in it, sieve it, put it into a wooden tub. That used to go over magnets as well. Then it used to go into a wooden tub, and then it used to go out to the customer. That's how glaze is made, basically. The ingredients determine what colour it ends up in, from white all the way through to any colour you wanted. You know, I mean, in them days you used to have avocado bathroom suites and blue bathroom suites and things like that. Well, we used to make the glaze for the colours.
It was literally one pile of rubbish on top of another pile of rubbish that went up from the very base of Longport. Went up in a series of grades of various ages, very old at the bottom, new at the top, where Wade's was, Wade's Pottery. Theirs was all nice bright new shore drugs that came down onto not so nice new shore drugs and then onto very dirty shore drugs. Covering what, 200 years, wasn't it? To go 200 years worth of rubbish tipped.
But the biggest clanger I dropped on a pot bank was we were making some compotes for the Ideal Homes exhibit. A compot is a cake stand. And they made these 4 special. And the boss sent me to fetch them down. Got them on my head now, coming down the flight of stairs, and it caught at the bottom of the stairs. Knocked the first one off the front, because the board went up, and the back one fell off as well. And I just managed, managed all 2 of them. But they were decorated magnificent. They were beautiful. Still weren't worth a fortune, but so they weren't very happy with me on that. That was my biggest clanger. My biggest clanger was later on in Myatt's, where I used to bring trucks down from the printing shop down to the kiln, to the gloss kiln, where I used to fire them under there, and there was 70 dozen plates on at a time, and this one I got 70 dozen soup plates on. Used to come down, and you to go through a pair of doors that had been opened and a wedge put either side to keep them open. But the wedge was on a part where a steam pipe went underneath, and they'd covered the steam pipe over with a steel plate. So when I come over with this big truck, the weight pressed the steel plate down, which released the 2 wedges, and the wedges come down and shut on it and stopped the truck dead. And of course, all 70 dozen plates were rolling all down.
I just went round and asked. I was fed up about it, so we decided we'd go and try another place. So you go in the lodge and say, is there any vacancies? And he'd say, yes, they want lithographers, or sometimes outside a factory, they'd have a notice board saying wanted lithographers, aerographers, gilders, whatever, whatever they needed. They put on the board outside, and then you just went in and went to see the personnel manager, and then you started the next day. Just like that.
I know in the summer of 1947, the winter of 1947-48, I think it was, everything was, we'd had foot and mouth disease in the autumn previous. We'd had a tater blight. Britain was feeding Europe, wasn't it, after the war, something like that. People talked about these things, but you knew nothing about it. I do remember in the winter, we used to all the way home to dinner centre for a square of bread and a plate full of gravy. Because that's all there was. And the bread came from America, didn't it, the flour. So there was like nothing breadish that year. And we had that and some cake and custard. Yeah, we had lots of cake and custard that winter. But we were running up there for weeks on end, just having bread and gravy for your dinner.
My dad. I think that was the one of the things in there, because I do remember there was a lot of fathers and son and husband and wife and families worked together in them days. You know, I think that's how people got the jobs in them days. They knew that if one of the family come out to work, the others would. The only drawback was if I did anything wrong, like, you know, went out with one of the girls or anything, then my dad knew all about it.
Well, there were some horrible jobs, apart from hard work. We were working on the bottle ovens all the while. And so as soon as the bottle ovens were empty, they were still red hot, of course, you had to go in and you were cutting bricks out. But you had to have gloves on all the while. Well, one gloves, a piece of flannel, because the bricks were red hot. And in fact, that's how I broke my finger. Picking a red hot brick up, and he threw another one out and trapped them. They were downdraft ovens. In other words, the draft from them took the heat down and along and out the chimney. And after so long, so much dirt and rubble dropped down these holes, we had to go about 20 yards away and lift a manhole up, go down and crawl along with a little lamp until he got underneath these ovens. And it was hot and clammy. I couldn't do it now with having asthma, but to get there, and you had a little tin to hold about 3 shovelfuls of rubbish. Then my father was the other end, and he'd pull it back, and then he'd empty it, and then I'd pull it back under. He did it that way. We built anything in the oven that was what they call a bag and facing. The oven inside got, say, perhaps 14 fires round, and each one had got like a casing of bricks round. That was known as a bag. And where the actual flame came in and went up the side of the oven, it burnt them bricks away more than the others. And of course, they weren't ordinary bricks, they were best doodle fire bricks. So if he said, go and do number 3 bag and facing, you'd count number 1, 2, 3, that one, and you would knock that down and cut a big square out and replace all that. That's what you'd do.
I did go to one where my auntie worked, Maddox. My mother used to go on to her very often, and that was another world altogether. You know, look through, say, a 5 or 6 year old's eyes. Yeah, ropes flying all over the place. Hundreds of little wheels whizzing around as the ropes went past them. No. Watch this and watch that, watch them ropes, that's all it was as you went through, because every bit of machinery was worked by a rope, wasn't it, off a donkey engine.